So as the restriction from the first lockdown were eased in May, there was a new rule that allowed Italians to visit relatives to the 6th degree and kin or affins to the 4th degree. And here, relatives means directly related to one another, and kin or affins means people who have become part of the family by marrying in, and so by bringing also sets of relatives through this marrying in process of becoming kin. Italians were also allowed to visit what was called by the rule stable affects. So now think of a moment of your own lives, of your own relatives and relations. If this law was in effect here, who would you be able to visit and who could you not visit? Who is your relative to the 6th degree? Who are your kin or affins to the 4th degree? And who would be your stable affects? Can you make a list of people you can have dinner with? Can you make a list of people who you cannot see at all and you have to avoid? Now, if you're thinking about this and perhaps even trying to make a list and you're unsure about it or you find it really confusing, you are not alone. Italians were very puzzled too. And in fact, there was an array of different posts and sites to help people calculate who they could visit and who were their relatives to 6 degrees or their kin to 4th degree. This that you see here in the images is an example of one of these sites. And, I find it really interesting, the dizzying list of the different degrees of relation with fathers and mothers and sisters and great-grandfathers and things like that all included in it. So even if they were not anthropologists, people in Italy in May were asking really similar questions to the ones of Kenny and Smiley in this chapter of your textbook. How do people not just establish, but also name, think about, and value social relations? Why, for example, could Italians not visit their best friends or a new partner, but they could visit the children of cousins? Perhaps people they did not even feel close to, or perhaps people they did not visit in a very long time. And it is interesting here how the relationship by blood was privileged in this rule, something that we will also discuss more later. So our questions here are, who is related? How do you trace descent? How do people identify as members of the kinship group? Which groups do children belong to, for example? Matrilineal descent, in which people trace kinship through the father side of the family, is quite different than matrilinear descent, for example, where people are connected through a line of women. And what you can see here is a diagram of patrilinear descent and kinship groups called lineages that then altogether form a clan, which is a bigger collection of lineages. So more generally, a question for us to consider when we think of Italy and this rule is where and when and how do kinship ties emerge as important in particular societies? Which effects do they have? How do people talk about it? And this Italian example, of course, reminds us that the study of kinship might seem easy at start, but actually it's really complicated and it gives rise to many different questions. And I think something that Kenny and Smiley do quite well in this chapter is give you a sense of all of these really complicated questions that can immediately arise when you start thinking about the social relations people are connected to and the kinship groups they are part of and the way in which people establish relations with one another. Some of the issues that might arise around kinship and the creation of kinship ties are those around power. For example, what power relations exist within families and within social groups? Are some individuals in more or less advantaged position? How come and how does it change for time? What are some conflicts and alliances that arise within and between groups such as families and communities or kinship groups? And in regards to the latter, in regards to conflict and alliances, Kenny and Smiley, for example, point out that kinship relation can form the basis of political, cultural, and geographic groupings, and that in turn, these groupings can refer back to family relations, kinship, alliances, and genealogies. An important point of this chapter is that kinship is at least 3 things at once. It is a system that works in a particular way in a particular society, and that's why anthropologists have been interested in how kinship works in particular places and have developed a whole array of terminology of words in order to describe it. It is also a way for people to think about being related, a way people think about themselves and others and the kinds of relationships that connect them to individual and to groups. But kinship is also an actual practice on the ground, and kinship rules and practices are usually flexible, often or always contested, and this is where a lot of dilemmas and debates can arise as people, sometimes bend the rule or interpret them differently and generally are involved in very dynamic ways to establish relations with others. Your textbook, for example, talks about polygamous households and talks about multiple spouses creating at times very particular lines of divisions. Stories about genealogies and about lines of descent from different spouses or from different offsprings of different spouses can become very important for the identity of the people as well as politically. And they can also give rise to different interpretations, some of them which last for many generations and that we can still trace today. So that is something that Kenny and Smiley also talk about. I would like to spend a little bit of time Anthropologists have spent a lot of time studying kinship and have been involved in questions around kinship since the start of the discipline. So this raises a question, why has kinship been so important in anthropology? And Kenny and Smiley say that, explain how in the earlier discipline, anthropologists have started to look at kinship because in a way it is the glue of many societies. And here, when I say that kinship can be a kind of glue in a society, I still want you to remember that kinship system, what I said before, are always flexible and debated. So the context and history of a place is very important to consider how this glue is created and how it works. And kinship is also connected to a wide array of practices and ideas. And because of that, starting from kinship can help anthropologists understand many other aspects of the societies, as well as cultural and social change that might happen in a society over time. And very importantly, kinship is also a way of understanding, or it has helped anthropologists to realize that ideas or concepts like the family or being a parent, gender roles, sexuality, and even courtship and love and friendship and affection are all culturally constructed. So they are constructed and understood in particular ways in particular places. One of the first and central simple idea of anthropology of kinship is that there is no obvious natural or ideal family form in the world. but the family is very widely. Something I want to touch upon, because it is a little bit, it might be a little bit difficult at first to understand, is the idea of kinship as defined by blood. So Kenny and Smiley explain that in Western European and North American society, and certainly we can say in Italian society, since we started from the Italian example, we think of kinship as defined by blood. So we think that it is the genetic material, the biological facts of reproduction, which determine kinship, which are at the basic of kinship. There are the most important things that tell us who is related and why. And we also think that, of course, this is so. This must be so because it is based in science and in biology. In a sense, it is based on the fact of nature. So it is kind of obvious that it is so. And this is also what the early anthropologists thought, is this must be so in all societies, simply because it is a fact of nature. However, the study of Schneider helped anthropologists understand that this North American, Western European, and Italian focus on genetics and biology, so this focus on blood relations, is itself a particular culturally shaped way to define, name, determine, and think about kinship. So the fact that we think of kinship as naturally being based on biology is not universal, is a cultural idea itself, and not in all societies biology has the same importance when it comes to kinship. So to say differently, not all society really care about the biological facts of reproduction or base kinship on those facts. And here I want to read again the quote by Schneider in your textbook. It is on page 94, because it is, a really intriguing and really important idea. And the first time I actually encountered this idea, it took me a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, this is actually a cultural idea that biology determines kinship. It doesn't need to be that way. I just believed all of my life that it was like that. So Schneider says, and this is in page 94 of your textbook, in American cultural conception, kinship is defined as biogenetic. This definition says that kinship is whatever the biogenetic relationship is. If science discovers new facts about biogenetic relationship, then that is what kinship is and was all along, although it may not have been known at the time. Hence, the real, true, verifiable facts of nature are what the cultural formulation is. So notice that these are put together, right? The facts of nature and the understanding of kinship. And it is this coming together that is a cultural construction. So Schneider continues, the relationship which is real or true or blood or by birth can never be severed, whatever its legal position. Legal rights may be lost, but the blood relationship cannot be lost. It is culturally defined as being an objective fact of nature, of fundamental significance, and capable of having profound effects. And its nature cannot be terminated or changed. And so, as I said, as Kenny and Smiley explained, this, however, is a culturally specific way of understanding kinship, and not in all societies this is the case. Kenny and Smiley, for example, talk about commensality, or the practice of eating together, the sharing of food, as being a basis of kinship in several societies, and that as being more relevant, more important than who is linked by blood to other people. The examples they make about newer society also goes in this direction, because in newer society, you have biological parenthood and social parenthood, and that is especially important for fathers. So there is social fatherhood and biological fatherhood, but they can be, so to speak, separated. That is why it is possible in our society to have ghost marriages. A woman can marry, a living man and have children with this living man, but she could be married to him in the name of a ghost. So socially, and that is what is most important, is that she's actually married to a deceased person who could not have children. And the children she will have will be children of this ghost, of this deceased person, who then will be able to have offsprings and who will be able to continue a lineage, right? And what is interesting here is first that the two are separated, the biological fatherhood and the social fatherhood, and that it is the social fatherhood that is important, more important than the biological one. Similarly, in our society, a woman can marry another woman and become a man in social terms and the father of this woman's children. So there again, parenthood and biological parenthood, social parenthood and biological parenthood are different. They can be disassociated. In our society, also, when we think of blood kinship, cows and the exchange of cows is something that allows the formation of kinship. So blood is one aspect, or like direct descent, and biological reproduction is one aspect, but the social reproduction of kinship group and the social reproduction of families actually goes with the exchange of cattle. So again, this is an example of how peculiar the idea of kinship by blood is when we look at it from the point of view of other societies.